If capitalism is exploitative, is socialism the solution? If it isn't, is this too true to handle? Welcome to Too True Philosophy. I'm your host, the Thinking Man, and I like to philosophically challenge what people believe, even if it's too true to handle. In this video, I'll be looking at capitalism versus socialism. We're often told by left-wing advocates about capitalist exploitation, whereby they argue that it's a system that leads to poverty and injustice. But how accurate is this? And is socialism better? Let's start with the definition of capitalism. Strangely, the term capitalism was actually coined primarily by socialists in the 19th century, who used it as a label to criticize free market economics and private property ownership. In particular, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels did the most to popularize this term through their writings. By the time we got to the middle of the 20th century, capitalism was regularly used by everyone, even those who weren't against it. So for the purpose of this video, I'll stick to capitalism as the term to describe a system of free market economics and private property ownership. Next, let's break down what free market economics and private property ownership actually mean. Free market economics is a system where people voluntarily interact with each other by buying and selling goods and services. Prices are set by individuals in a market, depending on how popular their goods and services are or how easy it is to provide them. So something really popular may end up being more expensive, partly because demand allows suppliers to charge more, but also because popularity can lead to scarcity. Sometimes something is scarce because it's rarer or harder to get hold of, like some natural resources. Moving on to private property ownership, this is quite simply when you can directly own the rights to property. This takes lots of forms like owning a house, car, phone, money, or clothing. In every case, ownership of those goods is directly connected to individuals, although sometimes ownership can be shared, like a house owned by a couple, but there is no real limit to how many people can own private property as a group. My descriptions may seem really simple, but people like to overcomplicate things. It's much easier to make us do things that aren't in our best interests when they seem too complicated to understand. Always remember that the truth should never be out of reach, even if it means explaining things more simply. Now let's look at what criticisms people have of capitalism. Within this system, sellers of goods and services make a profit, and socialists are very critical of this for several reasons. One is that people who own property tend to make more profit than those who don't. For example, if you own a business, you generally make more profit than those who work for you. People working for the business owner will be paid for their labor and don't own any property associated with the business. This arrangement is seen as exploitative by socialists, who argue laws should be made to stop the business owner from taking advantage of workers. Over time, socialists also argue that this system leads to ever more wealth in the hands of a shrinking number of capitalists, who become so wealthy and powerful that no one can challenge their position at the top of society. But what about socialism? Is this better? First, let's quickly define what socialism is. The simplest way to describe this is a system where property ownership is often in the hands of the government as the representative of society as a whole. This can include infinite forms of public ownership, like utility companies, healthcare, or transport networks, and even housing, supermarkets, entertainment venues like stadiums, or banks and building societies. Many will point out that governments own military and police, roads and street lighting, government buildings, or courthouses and prisons. But this is usually considered a bare minimum for a government to control. Otherwise, the state can't really do its primary job of protecting its citizens. All governments require taxes, but under socialism, this is progressive, meaning that people earning more will pay a larger percentage than those earning less. Taxation acquired is then used to pay for anything it provides, including money for people with certain needs, called welfare. This can be given to the unemployed or disabled, but often this comes as tax credits for people raising children. Under socialism, rules also dictate how business takes place in a free market, called regulation. This puts limits on how businesses operate. At the bare minimum, this will protect the environment or prevent goods and services that are harmful, like food that causes food poisoning. So is this system better than capitalism? As already stated, it's argued that you need socialism to stop exploitation under capitalism. The problem is that this invariably leads to growth in taxation, regulation, and debt, which weakens the wealth-creating capitalist part of the economy called the private sector. And without the private sector, you can't pay for all those socialist goodies. Why? Because as the state grows larger, tax revenue starts to shrink, so the government will eventually go into debt trying to maintain all its socialist programs.
I've been listening to you talking, and I think you're starting to misrepresent the case for socialism. Socialism doesn't lead to debt or a reduction in tax revenue. That's caused by greedy capitalists that hoard more and more wealth until society collapses. Socialism actually stops capitalists from doing this.
Okay, let's test your argument. In the private sector, you add and multiply wealth by providing goods and services. Socialism divides and subtracts wealth that's produced in the private sector, but socialism can never grow wealth because dividing and subtracting it just moves it to what we call the public sector. A certain amount of government spending on bare minimum areas like roads and police can help the private sector, but once this reaches a tipping point, taxes and regulations get so high that people aren't incentivized to work or create businesses anymore.
You're just assuming that everyone is a greedy capitalist, and that people don't care about each other enough to work towards the common good. Not everyone is as selfish as a capitalist.
So you think this is selfish? Well, even if people support socialism, evidence shows that once this grows too large to maintain, productive members of an economy move away, work less, or even stop working completely if relying on welfare is a better option.
So now you're arguing that people go on welfare because they're lazy? Typical capitalist propaganda. Government spending is often better than the private sector, so your argument about dividing and subtracting is nonsense. You only need to look at Nordic or Scandinavian countries to see that socialism works well when it's done properly.
Scandinavian and Nordic countries are typically used as examples of good socialism, but the truth is far more complicated. In these places, it's extremely expensive to live because socialism causes price inflation in the economy. We're then told that even though the cost of living and taxes are high, the government provides lots of welfare and services. This does take away the individual's ability to make their own decisions about their lives, however, and makes a good quality of life much more difficult to attain. A problem then arises that if you're unlucky enough to be a higher rate taxpayer, this doesn't make sense when there's no meaningful improvement to your life.
Well, I'd rather live in a Scandinavian or Nordic country than a capitalist hellhole like the United States.
I'll make one final point, angry man, but I'm not sure you'll like it. Socialism works better for those working for the government and those on welfare. Everyone else invariably has to endure growing suffering until there's a huge disparity in the market between the private and public sector. There's a theory that describes this called the Laffer curve, which shows that as taxes rise, there comes a point where revenue the government gets will start to decrease, because people work less. Imagine that by the time you paid all your taxes, you're left with less than half of your income. People are going to find ways to avoid this.
The Laffer curve? No one believes that theory. It's totally debunked.
I'm not sure how you can debunk a theory that shows how people don't want to have too much of their income taken away, but there are so many examples of how economies stall when taxes are too high that it would take a whole new video to lay it out. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe.